What's up? Today I'm extremely happy to share with you probably the deadliest opening gambit that I know, called the Tennison Gambit. But for today's video I prepared an improved and revised version of it so that you know how to play it against beginner level opponents, against advanced level opponents, and there are some really important notes that you gotta be aware of. But first of all, what is a Tennison Gambit? So normally it arises from the Scandinavian Defense, but in a moment I'm going to share with you how you can use it against any opening. So here, instead of playing the expected move pawn takes d5, all of a sudden you gambit this pawn by playing knight f3. Most of your opponents will just capture this pawn, some of them will even think that you pre-moved this move knight f3 without anticipating black's move pawn e5, and they'll happily grab the pawn. Now you go knight g5 and you're ready to take this pawn back on the next move, therefore black naturally defends it. Now you play pawn d3 and you attack this pawn for the second time. What can black do now? I mean, the most natural move to play for black would be simply to take here on d3 and secure their material advantage. Of course, there are a few other alternatives as well, but they're a lot less popular, and I'm going to share with you those lines just as well. But most of your opponents will go here, bishop takes d3. Currently black is a pawn up, white is a bit ahead in development. This knight on g5 is particularly annoying, maybe your pieces are even somewhat putting pressure here. And for that reason, most of your opponents will wish to play pawn h6, hoping that the knight will go back and black will enjoy their extra pawn and will win the game down the road. But instead of that, all of a sudden these knights will be willing to sacrifice here on f7, and that wins the game. What's the trick? Well, the knight must be captured because it's also forking the queen and rook. After king takes, there is the killer move bishop g6. It's covered check, we're attacking here the queen, and we're also delivering check to the king. For that reason, we're just winning the queen, and that's usually the position where chess commentators end the line saying that white wins. Although it's true, there are a few really important notes to be made here. Definitely white has a winning advantage. We've got an extra queen, although black has two minor pieces, but that's not a sufficient compensation. The king is also weak, so yeah, it is a completely winning game. But the first trick is pawn e5, and here it prepares this check bishop b4, hoping to then get back the queen, rook takes d8. And Gotham Chess in his video about the Tennison Gambit said that here, in order to save the queen, you just gotta take this pawn. And while we love Gotham Chat in general, in this particular case, that's actually a big blunder, because if you do that, then after knight takes c6, this queen is trapped. On the next move, knight e8 comes here to pick up the queen. White has nothing to do really, so white does anything, knight e8, and all of a sudden, black turns the table and wins the game. So that's not how you play it. Alright, going back to this position, if you're ever, in doubt about this queen, let's say black goes pawn e5 or black goes knight to c6, which is another way for black, even more common way, knight c6, trying to bait you into capturing this pawn, and that would be actually a losing mistake. So it's quite annoying that most players achieve this winning position, but then they spoil it right on the next move, because here it transposes to the same stuff and now black wins. Basically, if you are ever in doubt about your queen, just drop it back. I mean, even all the way back to d1. Now the queen is safe and you're winning the game. It's as simple as that. Or if you wish to be more fancy, you can do it with a tempo, queen d3 check, bishop f5, now queen g3 check once again. So you're constantly delivering checks, and after that you can castle or whatever, and like in the simplest way possible you maintain your winning advantage. And here is some really funny stuff. Although the Tennison Gambit can be a very dangerous opening weapon against black's first move pawn d5, the problem is the Scandinavian Defense is not the most popular black's choice. As you can see here, according to the stats, it's only the fourth most played move here, and majority of your opponents will instead play either a pawn e5 or a pawn c5. So what are you going to do about that? Well, instead of pawn e4, you can start off the game with the move knight f3, and it kind of drags your opponent into this territory. Because now this knight from f3 controls the e5 square, therefore black can't push their pawn there or else it will be taken. And black is left with probably the main move is pawn d5, that's what your opponents will play most frequently, expecting that after pawn d4, that will transpose into the queen's gambit. But you instead play pawn e4 and you say, hey no, this is the Tennison Gambit. Really annoying for black because they never intended to play the Scandinavian Defense, but you drag them into the same territory. So that's gonna be extremely unpleasant for black. Alright, what else can black do? Although d5 is the most played move, what else can black do? Well, the second relatively popular move is knight f6. And after that, you can still insist on playing the Tennison Gambit by playing pawn d3. That prepares the move pawn e4 on the next move, that would occupy the center. And if black goes pawn d5 here, then voila, after pawn e4, you're still switching it back to the Tennison Gambit. Black will think, hey, why not to grab the pawn? They hope that you're going to recapture, but you don't. You play knight g5, and you turn it into the Tennison Gambit. As you can see here, most of them will capture here. You take bishop d3, and most of them will play pawn h6, which loses the game after knight takes f7. And here's the funniest part. After you just played pawn to d3, as you can see, although d5 is popular, the top choice of black is pawn g6. Now you play pawn e4, black goes pawn g7, now you go pawn e5, and just look at this. The most played move of black is castling. Probably black pre-moved this move, castling, before you played pawn e5, and so the computer just automatically executes this move. I mean, that's crazy. You just win the knight for nothing, and that's the most played line. And if black moves the knight away, then, oh, okay, you just have a normal game of chess. Now when we know how to force your opponent into the Tennison Gambit, let's also explore some sidelines so that you will have like all-round knowledge and you don't just rely on a single little trick. Now here in this position, we know that the main move is pawn takes and you recapture. That's what most of your opponents will play. But if your opponent is a more experienced player, he or she may play bishop g4, hitting your queen. And that poses a lot of problems for white in most cases, but the move that I recommend that you play is not bishop b2 or some stuff like that, which indeed allows black to just get away with an extra pawn, but to play queen to d2, and you kind of try to insist on playing the same stuff. Now this pawn is still hanging, therefore at this point black will probably capture here. Now you recapture by the bishop, and although, you know, the position is slightly different, funnily enough, most of your opponents will still play pawn h6. It still looks super cool for black, apart from the fact that, you know, it still is in the same fashion. So basically, black has to address this threat somehow. If they play pawn h6, or let's say pawn g6, trying to fianchetto the bishop, it still fails to all the same tactics. King takes, you know, and then you're winning the queen over there. In this case, it's actually even worse for black, because after queen takes d8, they can't even move this knight. Now it's actually pinned down to the rook. So you're definitely winning here. Another way for black to try to refute the gambit would be playing bishop f5, saying, hey, I don't want to take here on d3, I want you to take here, and I'll trade queens, and we'll get into a winning endgame. In that case, what you do is you don't take here on e4. Definitely we're not playing the Tennison Gambit to play, you know, a worse endgame. You go knight c3, and you're willing to sacrifice this pawn, because after that, all of a sudden you've got queen f3 with multiple threats in many different directions. And this move actually confuses black a lot, because they was hoping that they're almost winning the game, but now all of a sudden there are these annoying threats, you know, to the pawn, to the rook potentially in the future, and most of your opponents will chicken out to play bishop c8. Funnily enough, this underdevelopment, you know, is the most played move statistically, even though of course such a move can be really good. Now you happily take the pawn back, and yes, you're a pawn down, but you have a huge lead in development. And basically, I would not really say that this refutes the gambit. I'd prefer playing this as white, especially in bleeds. Here, again, most of your opponents play passive moves, just trying to finish their development. Pawn e6, bishop e3. It's better to castle queenside, because then your rook hits the queen potentially. Black goes bishop e7. Now you castle queenside. It puts the rook opposite to the queen and creates, you know, various kinds of discovered check threats or discovered attack threats to the queen along the d file. For that reason, black will probably play something like, you know, knight to d7, just trying to cover the queen. And in this case, there is also a really good move that is worth remembering. It's the move queen to h3. You make it seem like you just target these pawns so that black can't castle. And while it's true, there is also a secondary threat just as well. When your opponent goes pawn h6, trying to get rid of this annoying knight, all of a sudden the knight changes its mind and still sacrifices itself. On e6, pawn takes, and this way we open up the king and we finish off this deadly attack within just a couple moves. Queen takes, and there is no defense against queen to f7 checkmate on the next move. That's another cool way for you to win in a very spectacular fashion. Alright, and perhaps the final variation that we gotta cover here, instead of playing the move knight f6, black can defend this pawn by their bishop. Bishop f5. And that's also quite a challenging move for white, so you definitely know what to do here. Basically, you are at the crossroad. You have two options. The riskier option is pawn d3. It's riskier, but at the same time it's trickier, because black has some ways to lose the game immediately. A more solid way, well, relatively more solid because the gambit is overall a more aggressive opening choice. But a more solid way is playing knight c3, attacking it with the knight. And there is also a very good follow-up in this line. I've recorded already a video about that. I'll link it, and you can check this out after watching this one. I definitely recommend this. It's a very strong opening line as well. But for this video, let's take a look at a riskier option, pawn d3. And the idea is still the same. We're attacking this pawn, and if black captures over here, you play queen f3. The position is slightly different. There is no black's knight on f6 and no knight on c3, right? So that's a little different as compared to the previous line. But overall, the overall picture is still the same. Now, what can black do now? Lots of your opponents will notice this threat to the bishop and will just play pawn a6 to defend it. Now you take bishop takes d3, kind of offering an exchange, and funnily enough, most of your opponents, according to the database, capture here on d3, desperately hoping that you're going to recapture by the pawn or queen, but you just play queen f7 checkmate. That's a big disappointment for black, and it's actually a very popular opening line. So you've got a chance to deliver something like scholar's checkmate even against an advanced level opponent. And now let's take a look at the most challenging and the strongest way of playing this for black. The strongest move is not pawn e6, but just to be greedy and to keep taking all the material that is given by white. Pawn takes c2, threatening potentially here, maybe in some lines even queen d1. Alright, after that, what do you do? Well, you play knight c3, you just develop. White still threatens here, still threatens with the b7 pawn, and black goes pawn e6 usually. And after that, you have an interesting opportunity to make black's life harder. It's still the sacrifice knight takes f7. But in this case, it's not really a sacrifice, because after king takes, you want to play pawn g4 and regain the bishop right on the next move. And because it's pinned down to the king, it can't move away. And that's the line that really can confuse your opponent. Now, strictly speaking, black has a couple extra pawns, and if they're managed to defend their king successfully, then they'll end up with a couple extra pawns and a winning position. So strictly speaking, this position is not good if you're playing against a grandmaster. But if you're playing this in blitz against, just your chess body, then, you actually have, I think, pretty good chances, because it's not that easy at all for black to figure out how to defend the king. And you just attack it. Your plan is that simple. Checkmate the king, okay? And for black, what to do here? If you just think about it, it's certainly not easy. You attack here, your bishop is ready to join the party along this diagonal. Not easy for black to figure out what to do. In most cases, they go run right away. They play bishop b4. Now you take here, and here the most played move is yet another, perhaps an accuracy. Bishop takes c3, pawn takes. Now the position is not bad for white, actually. And after pawn takes f5, hoping that you're going to recapture, you don't need to, because you play for quick development and attack bishop c4, check to the king, and now black is already in trouble. King goes back somewhere, doesn't matter, now you castle, and now this king appears under the massive fire of all of your pieces. For example, knight e7, you can go rook e1, take an aim at this knight and king. If knight c6, you can bring one more piece into the attack, bishop a3. And yeah, you're just winning here. Your pressure along all these files is just way too strong. Also, this knight is pinned, can't move. So even queen takes f5 is a threat on the next move. And along the e-file also, it's a disastrous pressure for black. So, although very risky line, again, strictly speaking, I would not recommend that you play it in serious over-the-board games against an advanced level opponents, but for blitz it's perfectly suitable, and I think you'll win a lot of games with it. There's one more video which I've mentioned previously with an additional dangerous opening line for black in the Tennison Gambit. You may click over there and check it out right now. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed it, consider subscribing to not miss out on future uploads. Thank you very much. Take care. Bye bye.